Welcome back. Today's story filled with drama and unexpected turns. Hit like, subscribe, and let's jump in.
I woke up to the usual sounds of a hospital, the steady beeping of a machine, the smell of cleaning products, and soft voices nearby. I tried to open my eyes, but nothing happened. I tried to move, but my body stayed still. When I wanted to speak, my mouth didn't work. It was like being frozen. As I lay there, I listened closely and realized someone else was in the room. From the faint smell of hairspray and perfume, I guessed it was a woman. Then I heard her crying softly and hoped she wasn't crying because of me. After all, I was 92, maybe it was just my time. A moment later, another person entered the room. "How's he doing?" "Any sign of recovery from the stroke?" a woman asked, her voice sounding professional. I assumed she was a nurse. "Nothing. He just lies there," another woman replied. "Well, I need to examine him. I'll remove the tape from his eyes and put some drops in. We must keep his eyes moist since he can't blink," the first voice said. My heart raced with anticipation. Perhaps I could finally see if my eyes were freed. I felt the tape gently pulled away, and fingers in latex gloves opened my eyelids. As my eyes adjusted to the brightness, I found myself staring at a white ceiling, unable to shift my gaze. Then a kind face came into view. "All right, Edward, I'm going to shine a light in your eyes to check for a reaction. If you want to show us anything, now's your chance." "Any reactions?" the second woman asked. At first, I thought I might have seen something, but I can't get him to respond. "I guess it was just wishful thinking," the first woman replied. Then another face entered my line of sight. It was my daughter. "I don't know, but I feel like there's still something behind those eyes when I look into them. I sense he's looking back at me. Listen, Clara, I'll leave the tape off his eyes for a while, but you need to put drops in every 10 minutes. I lay there, wishing with all my heart for my daughter to move back into my view. My thoughts drifted back to the years that had passed since I was reunited with her. I remembered standing at the back of a small chapel with two of my associates, waiting for my estranged daughter to walk down the aisle as the guest of honor at her wedding. It had been 11 long years since I'd last seen her, and not a day had gone by without missing her. To understand how I got here, let me rewind a bit. My wife at the time vanished with our child. Initially, I feared one of my enemies had taken them. Although such actions were frowned upon in organized crime, there were factions from Eastern Europe who didn't share our code. Each time they intruded on our territory, we dealt with them decisively. They kept trying, and we consistently returned their emissaries in pieces. With my wife and child missing, it was time to teach them a lesson. I assumed they wanted a war, and I was ready to give them one. I assembled a team, my guys, some family friends, and a few mercenaries. Our targets resided in a remote village in Serbia where everyone was part of the narcotics cartel ruling the area, including the local Orthodox priest. I'm not going to go into details here, all I'll say is that a little over 150 men, women, and children died there. They were punished for my wife and daughter, the message was sent. I was on the warpath. Almost a year later, I got a phone call. "Mr. Bennett," a female voice asked. "I'm Victor the Bulldog Bennett, not Mr. Bennett." "What the hell do you want?" "I'm sorry, sir, but I was asked to give you a message," she replied with a soft Slavic accent. Before she could continue, I yelled, "I'm a very busy man. What makes you think I'm interested in your stupid message, anyway? It's about your wife and daughter." That slowed me down a little, but I was right back on the offensive with the next breath. "My family is dead. They were killed by a Serbian narcotics lord." "No, sir, they weren't killed by anyone. Your wife ran away with her boyfriend and took your daughter with them. They were afraid of your temper if she asked for a divorce." I lost it. I threw the phone across the room and started screaming at the top of my lungs for my number 2. A whole village in Serbia died because of that. By the time my number 2 got me settled down, I realized that I had not stayed on the phone long enough to get any information. My number 2 started calling around to find someone to peek into the phone company's records to determine where the mysterious call came from. As they tried, I was pacing about the room, just being a royal pain, when my cell phone rang. "Yeah," I answered. I guess I wasn't very polite. The same soft voice with the Slavic accent was on the other end. "Mr. Bennett, we were cut off." "Yeah, I'm him," and we were sort of cut off. May we continue our conversation? My number 2 started recording the call somehow. Please do. I would like to find my wife and daughter, Mr. Bennett. Call me Victor, all my friends do. Victor, my boss would like to be your friend. After what you did to the Vukovic cartel, he worked very hard to find your wife. At first, it was just to supply you with their location so you could arrange for a decent burial. But as his inquiries progressed, he could find no one responsible or any indication of their fate until they were found still alive in Montana. Why would he want to do this for me? I asked. You sent a message with your treatment of the Vukovic cartel. My employer wishes to avoid the same treatment. He would like to have your permission to call you Victor. She and I talked for the next 25 minutes as she brought me up to date. When the conversation ended, I had a name, address, and phone number for my wife. She and her boyfriend were still living in Montana. My employer would like to meet with you. Montana is a state that he has many friends living in. Would it be possible for you to meet with him? She asked. We agreed upon a date and a spot in San Francisco. San Francisco was considered neutral ground for all the crime families. 2 weeks later, my number 2 and I were on a flight bound for California. We had an advance team there already, they were sent to just look around. I didn't really trust anybody. My number 2 and I got off the commercial flight and were met by a very attractive woman. She was about 5 feet 5 inches tall, wearing a dress that showed off all her assets. The dress wasn't too tight, too short, or overly colorful. Looking at her, I could almost forget why I was here in San Francisco. Mr. Bennett, I'm here to be your guide. May I help you get settled in your rooms and escort you to dinner? There, we will discuss what plans my father has for the meeting, that same soft, Slavic-accented voice stated. My father, I picked out of her greeting. If she really was his daughter, he was showing his trust in me for her safety, I thought. Her driver retrieved our luggage and loaded it in the limo. It was San Francisco, and the weather was around 75 degrees. The 3 of us waited in the air-conditioned limo as the driver stored the luggage. My number 2 examined the crowd milling around. He spotted 4 of our advance team in the throng. He also spotted about 10 Eastern Europeans who looked suspicious. He asked, Hi, my name is Leo, and I'm Victor's number 2. May I ask your name? I'm Natalie. It's a very common name from the area I grew up in, she replied. Natalie, I began, it's very trusting of your father to send you, his daughter, to meet us. It would have been an even greater gesture if it wasn't for all his men in the area protecting you. She looked at me and softly began laughing. Victor, this will be fun for you and me. You spotted my father's men, and my driver spotted about 4 of yours. I propose a truce, let's just get acquainted. That night, over dinner, she and I became friends. Leo and her driver cum bodyguard ate at another table. They looked as if they were actually getting along, which impressed both Natalie and me. I learned about the village she called home, where she lived with her father and 2 younger brothers. We talked until almost midnight. I was still on East Coast time, so I was the one that petered out first. As she escorted me to the elevator, she whispered, If you like, I will spend the night in your room, that way, I will be your hostage. I will be a very cooperative hostage. Then she smiled, that smile all women seem to have. Natalie, I love your offer, but I fear that your father might object. I know if you were my daughter, I wouldn't like you spending the night with a strange man. She faked a pouty look on her face and gave me a good-night kiss on the cheek. The suite was very comfortable, but I still had trouble falling asleep that night. Part of the problem was the paranoia caused by meeting a stranger outside of my comfort zone. Part was the anger I felt for my wife and her desertion of me. And finally, I was confused by my feelings for Natalie. She appeared to be the perfect daughter and companion, but my survival instincts warned me that she might not be what she appeared. Leo and I slept in, trying to adjust to the time difference. We were having breakfast in the hotel's buffet room when Natalie's driver approached. Good morning, gentlemen. I have been asked to invite you to dinner tonight at 8 p.m. in the hotel's large dining room. Natalie and her father would like to dine with both of you in a neutral setting. In such a public place, there will be no business discussed. Please accept this invitation, we would like to become better acquainted with you. You may expect us at 8. Thank you, I replied. After Leo and I finished breakfast, we returned to our suite. We had some phone calls to make. Etiquette demanded that we place some courtesy calls to the local bosses, as we were in their territory. Leo and I were invited to a large estate in a prestigious part of San Francisco for lunch and to explain our purpose in the area. The locals were the Italian faction, tasked with looking out for the interests of visiting Eastern families. We had an excellent lunch and some interesting conversation. I explained about my wife and the Eastern European cartel that was providing me with information. I got the feeling that these gentlemen didn't know the Eastern Europeans were in town. Someone would pay for this oversight. I assured them that the Eastern Europeans were my friends, and I vouched for them. I got a strange look from them as well as from Leo, so I figured I'd better explain. He offered me his only daughter as a hostage to assure my safety. A man who would do this has my trust. My explanation was accepted. They wished Leo and me good fortune, though they hinted that we should not extend our stay unless they approved. Around 6 p.m., the phone in our room rang. It was a hard voice on the line. I have been informed that you will be visiting us in Montana. Please supply me with the address you will be visiting while here. I will have someone check on the residence for you. While it was worded as a request, I knew better. Also, I would like to meet your Eastern European friends. They interest me, said the voice on the other end of the line. Before I could reply, the line went dead. As Leo and I were leaving for dinner, I asked him to write the name and address we received from Natalie last night on the pad near the phone. Later that night, when we returned to the room, the pad was missing. Dinner that night was a pleasant surprise. Natalie's father was a perfect gentleman, but as the evening progressed, I realized that something was wrong with him. He smiled a lot and carried on simple conversations, but when I tried to expand on anything, Natalie, who was seated next to me, squeezed my leg. It was her way of saying no. It was getting late when Natalie's father was escorted back to his hotel. He was tired, and his age was showing. Natalie and I decided to return to my suite for a nightcap. As we waited for the elevator, she said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "He is failing. He has Alzheimer's, and his mind is rapidly deteriorating. I actually run the family business, but because of our macho culture, it must appear that he is in control until one of my brothers takes over," she replied sadly. "You are a good daughter. I suspected that you were not as simple as you pretended to be. Thank you for trusting me with this information. Will you be coming with us to Montana?" "Yes, I would like to. I find myself drawn to you, and I'm not willing to give up that bond just yet. There are some people in Montana who would like to meet with your father. How would you like to make it happen?" I asked. "I will send him home. You and I will pretend to be lovers, and that is my reason for traveling to Montana. I will act as nothing more than a messenger to him." "Okay. Do we have to pretend?" I asked. The elevator doors opened, revealing a very happy woman. Natalie was smiling from ear to ear. The next morning, I was the one with the very happy expression on my face. That afternoon, my cell phone rang. The display indicated caller ID blocked. I guessed it was my friends in Montana. "Good afternoon. Did our Eastern European friend accept my invitation?" he asked. "Sort of," I replied. "He was required to return to his home, but his lovely daughter will accompany me as his representative. She understands his businesses. You will be staying with me. Do I need to furnish her a separate suite?" "That won't be necessary," I replied. I could hear the smile in his voice as he asked, "Separate beds?" "A-hole," was my reply. I could still hear him laughing as I hung up the phone. The next morning, actually, late the next morning because Natalie tried to wear me out with her energy, we left the hotel. If she could have gotten me going one more time, I'm sure she would have succeeded. Her driver took the two of us to a private plane at San Francisco's main airport. After dropping us off, he and Leo boarded a commercial airline bound for Denver. Natalie insisted that I rest on the plane trip because, as she put it, I'd need my strength for later. I guess she was right. I was sound asleep before the wheels left the ground. We were met at the airport by a limo and taken to a house high in the hills overlooking Denver. There, we were greeted by the lady of the house. She was a very elegant woman, in that classic, understated Montana style. "My husband is in meetings and regrets that he's unable to be here to welcome you. Please, let me show you to your room so that you may make yourselves comfortable." Dinner will be at 7, and dress is casual. Natalie replied, I do not have a selection of clothes with me. Please help me pick out something appropriate to wear. I would be honored to help, she replied graciously. If you're uncomfortable with your selection, we can go into the city and shop. Hey, what about me? I asked. Natalie replied, okay, we'll check your outfits, too. And check they did. I was sent into Denver with the chauffeur to a specific men's shop, $1,500 later, I had some new outfits to wear for my stay. We then stopped at a few women's apparel boutiques to pick up some packages. Apparently, the women were also out shopping, but their car wouldn't hold their loot. My credit card took a real beating that afternoon. The driver and I became close friends, as I was forced to sit in the front with him. The entire back seat was filled with purchases from the women's shops. Back at the house, he and I made quite a few trips up to the bedroom before the limo was empty. The ladies were waiting impatiently for us to finish so that they could begin modeling their new purchases for each other. I was ordered out of the room, so I wandered around downstairs, where I found myself surrounded by a couple of very large men. Mr. Bennett. Yes, I said, recognizing these types of men from my own operation. They were bodyguards, their job was to protect their boss. The boss must be home. I slowly raised my arms to my sides as if inviting them to frisk me. That will not be necessary. There are full-body scanners in this house. Mr. Petrov has asked us to escort you to his study, said the larger of the two. I accepted the invitation gratefully, though I wondered what would happen if I refused. Somehow, I had the feeling that I would accompany them one way or the other. They did not appear to be men who took no for an answer. I was escorted to a closed door, and one of the bodyguards knocked twice. Come in, was the reply from inside. Upon entering, I was greeted in the center of the room by an impeccably dressed man of about 55 years of age. Igor Mikhailov, he said, extending his hand. Victor Bennett. Please, call me Victor. Deal, Victor. I understand we have a chance to have a drink and become acquainted before the ladies arrive. Once we were comfortably seated in soft leather armchairs, a drink in hand, he began. Victor, I ask that you do not discuss our various businesses in front of my wife. She believes I am in real estate development, she would not appreciate what I actually do. How do you explain your bodyguards? Simple, I am a very rich man, and I need them to protect me from kidnappers. Well, judging by the house and location, I guess you're telling the truth, except for the kidnapper part, I replied with a smile. Smiling, he walked to his desk and picked up a manila envelope, which he handed to me. This is all the information I could gather on your wife and her lover on short notice. Please read it tonight so that you can make an informed decision on their fates. After a delightful dinner, I was more or less sent to my room to read the report. Natalie was invited into the study. The report was very thorough. I learned that my faithful wife wasn't. She started stepping out on me after we had been married about 12 years, right after she got a job with a regional insurance company. She worked her way through the local salesman before setting her sights on her married division manager, who was 20 years her senior. He eventually left his wife and children at my wife's insistence. When the company promoted him to vice president of the Northwest Division, my wife took my daughter because she hoped the kid would fill the void left in his heart by abandoning his own kids. Mr. Vice President was in the process of divorcing his wife. He was making her life miserable in hopes that she would give up and sign the papers. He sounded like a real piece of work. It took me about an hour to read the report, and I was weighing my choices for revenge. I wouldn't let anyone do this to me. I admit, it was an ego thing, but you have to remember, I have a really big ego, and revenge was a natural reaction for me. I didn't earn the nickname, the Bulldog, for nothing. A sledgehammer can send a strong message. I was sitting in an armchair, planning the pleasure I'd receive from dealing with him. Should I start with his hands, maybe his feet, then move up to his knees? Or perhaps go straight for the head? After deciding on his punishment, I would plan my wife's. There was a knock on the bedroom door. I opened it and found one of the bodyguards waiting. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Petrov would like your presence in the sitting room for coffee and after-dinner drinks with Mrs. Petrov and your guest, he politely requested. As I looked at this mountain of flesh, I wondered if anyone was dumb enough to refuse him. I sure wasn't. We walked to the sitting room like old friends. He opened the door and announced my presence. If he wasn't such a hard guy, you would have sworn he had attended English butler school. Victor, I hope we haven't interrupted your reading, but the ladies felt your presence was required, Roman stated. No problem. I finished the report you had prepared for me. I was just contemplating my follow-up actions. Believe me, I would much rather be in the company of these two beautiful women than reading a report, I replied. I was rewarded by two smiling faces. Roman looked over at his wife and Natalie. I think you have just made two friends for life. Natalie made room for me to sit next to her, her hand intertwined with mine, and I never realized it had happened, she just felt right next to me. Victor, tomorrow you and I will make plans to resolve your problem. I would like to resolve it for you, after all, isn't that what friends are for? Roman said. He continued, there are personal reasons, too. The man is a bigot, he doesn't like people from the Balkans or Jewish people. I know people like that, they don't like Eastern Europeans, either, I answered with a smile. Roman smiled back at me as I continued, Roman, my lifestyle is far from what my childhood religion teaches, but I still don't like people who can't respect others. He should be taught a lesson in respect. As much as I wanted to be the bearer of revenge, I felt that Roman's offer should be honored. The four of us had a very enjoyable evening, just talking and comparing our lives. Later that night, Natalie and I made love. It was not raw passion but something greater, a joining of souls. As we cuddled in post-coital bliss, I tried to devise a plan for us to be together. I couldn't. We were just too far apart. She was in Eastern Europe, and I was in the US. And that was just location, there were also our various business interests to consider. I couldn't see a way, we were doomed to spend our lives apart. The next evening, as I boarded a red-eye flight back to the East Coast, I saw a very sad woman being supported by Roman and his wife. My heart broke, but I was a tough guy and could show no emotion. My number two, Leo, understood my true feelings. He just put an arm around me and said, someday, my friend, she'll be yours. About 2 months later, I got an envelope in the mail. There was no return address on it, but inside was a newspaper article about an insurance executive who was badly beaten in an apparent robbery attempt. He was expected to live, but would never walk without special support again. There was also a typed note with the article, stating that the man was also a eunuch, a detail left out of the newspaper. I sent Roman a thank you note, just a simple card with only Victor as a signature. As I sent it, I realized that nothing had been done to my wife. I hoped she would suffer and have a hard life. Time and distance got between Natalie and me. We started calling each other weekly, then it dropped to 2 monthly, then to a couple of times a year, and eventually to nothing but a Christmas card for her and a birthday card. The cards were sent by my secretary, I didn't even sign them. From her, I got nothing. I guess she moved on. I only received one more piece of information on my wife. Her lover was medically retired from his insurance company. I suspected that he was given the choice to retire or be terminated, possibly because I had divorced my wife, citing adultery as the reason. My attorney then sued both her and her lover's employer for allowing the affair, as the company prohibited relationships between employees and supervisors. My legal team initially sued for several million, expecting to settle for less. Their legal team, however, did not know the extent of my connections. A week after the insurance company refused my claim, they were hit with major losses across all their large clients on the same night, amounting to millions in claims. 2 weeks later, when my legal team contacted them again, they again refused to negotiate. They were foolish. Another 3 weeks later, they were hit with further major losses, and this time, their largest clients also started jumping ship. It took 2 months before they were forced into bankruptcy. I never received any money from the company, but my ex-wife's boyfriend lost his pension in the process, and my ex was forced back to work in a low-level position to support him and my daughter. I walked around with a huge smile on my face, my guys assumed I had a chickie on the side, but Leo knew better. I heard the nurse walk back into my hospital room. "How's he doing?" "No change," was the answer. "I have to give him a massage to prevent bed sores." "Want to learn how?" My daughter's voice filled with hope. "I'd love to." "Will this help him?" The nurse tapped me on the forehead. "If he's still in there, he'll know." As the two of them rolled me from side to side, I got to see my room. It was a pleasant single room, well appointed and cheerful. I drifted off into darkness again, remembering earlier times. My life in organized crime had improved. I went from just a wise guy to a big boss. Okay, I wasn't Italian, but I was respected and allowed a seat on the council. My fortune increased, but I was still lonely. I got everything I wanted, but getting laid just didn't fill that empty spot in my heart. I missed my daughter. She was 12 years old when her mother snatched her from me. I tried to continue my relationship with her, but my letters were returned, and birthday and Christmas presents came back unopened. My attempts at calling her were met with changed numbers or unanswered calls when caller ID showed an East Coast call. One day, it all came to a head. My ex called me. "Sophia does not want anything to do with you," she said. "I told her you were responsible for Arthur's injuries. Leave us alone." Before I could respond, she hung up. It was all my bodyguards could do to keep me from getting on the next plane west and killing her. When I finally calmed down, I vowed to have no contact with any of them again. I closed my heart to them. I kept that promise for another 10 years. I would probably still be keeping that promise if, in my regular mail, a wedding invitation had not arrived. My daughter was getting married in September to a Mr. Daniel Turner. The invitation was not signed, and there was no response card included. I suspected my friend Roman was responsible, so I called him. "Hello, my friend," he answered after I identified myself. "Thank you for inviting me to my daughter's wedding. You deserve to attend. She is your only child, a father should be there. I'll make all the arrangements for your accommodations and transportation. I could not arrange for you to be a part of the ceremony," he concluded sympathetically. "You are a true friend. I accept your invitation. I bet my ex will be very upset at my appearance." "Don't worry. My people will keep her from acting up," he replied. We finished our call. Well, at least I would have something new to dream about these days. I would wake up cuddled with a pillow once or twice a week, dreaming of Natalie. I'd snuggle up to that pillow, believing she was in my arms after a night of love. But alas, I would wake from my dream alone. My other dreams were about inflicting pain on my ex and her lover. I must admit, I enjoyed these fantasies. When I awoke from one of those dreams, I was also disappointed, but this time because the dream wasn't true. I hated both of them and vowed to make them suffer for all the pain they caused me. The 2 months until the September wedding moved slower than usual for me. I couldn't wait to see my little girl again. I also wanted to meet the love of her life and make sure he was worthy of her. I called Roman and asked him to check out the young Mr. Turner. It took about 2 months, but I finally received a call from Roman. "Hello, Victor, my old friend. I have good news for you, your future son-in-law is someone to be proud of. Daniel met Sophia when they were both in college. She was a freshman, and he was a junior. It appears that it was love at first sight. They met in an elective course that was one of 3 choices required for their majors. Victor, he is a great kid and completely enamored with your daughter, just as she is with him. When he graduated, he got a job and an apartment near the college. She moved into the apartment a few 2 months later, and they became engaged. They've been completely faithful to each other ever since they met. After she graduated, they both moved to Seattle and got very good jobs." "Thank you," I interrupted. "You're welcome. Now, her degree is in social work, so I arranged for her to interview with a nonprofit where I have a few connections. She was accepted. Daniel was more of a challenge. Victor, your future son-in-law is a cop. A very well-respected cop, assigned to the organized crime division. So I think you can understand my reluctance to help him progress in his chosen profession." "She's marrying a cop?" I exclaimed. "Yes, Victor, she is. I'm sorry, but look at it from the bright side. If you continue to live on the East Coast, you'll be out of his jurisdiction, unless he becomes a federal. Damn it. I bet her mother did that on purpose." "Calm down, my friend. My people tell me that your ex had nothing to do with Sophia meeting Daniel. Sophia has no idea what you do for a living. Your ex convinced her that you are a construction worker, hence, the Bulldog nickname. That's good news. What does my ex think happened to her husband? This is the good part. She thinks he was mugged, and that his castration was part of the attack. Remember, I mentioned that he holds some prejudiced views. Your ex believes Arthur said something offensive to his attackers, which led to their retaliation. Roman's tone revealed he was smiling. Get out here and spend a few days visiting with us. Leave Leo in charge, I'll provide you one of my guys. They like you, and my wife is looking forward to your visit, so be prepared. Roman, I can't wait to see you again. I have good memories of the last time we met, when I had Natalie with me. I know a relationship with her was impossible, but I still have fond memories of the days we spent with you. I'll bring you up to speed on Natalie, Roman said. I do some business with her father occasionally. His tone wasn't encouraging, and I got the sense he was saying all he could on the matter. I became aware of my surroundings again by the sounds I was hearing. It must have been nighttime. The usual hustle and bustle of a busy hospital was quiet. My eyes must have been taped closed, as I could see no light. I tuned my senses in and realized that there was someone in the room with me. This time, I was sure it wasn't a woman. For a moment, I feared one of my enemies had discovered me, but I quickly dismissed that thought. I had been out of the game for about 30 years. There was no one left who still wanted me dead, and besides, all they had to do was wait. I was very close. The familiar sound of nurses' shoes entered the room. Hi, Judge Turner, how's he doing? I don't know. My wife says she sees all sorts of signs that he's still in there, but I don't. Maybe it's just wishful thinking on her part. Where is she tonight? Our daughter went into labor about 4 hours ago. They're up on the maternity floor. Well, I've got to get him ready for the night shift. If you want to visit your daughter, I'll be with your father-in-law for about an hour. I don't have a lot to do tonight, so you can take your time, the nurse answered. Judge Turner, I'd forgotten how well Daniel had succeeded over the years. He had started out as a detective, and now look at him, a federal judge. I admit, I did help his career along a bit. You know, a political contribution here, a tip there, sometimes just pointing the right people to the right places on his task forces. And, of course, making sure his name was always on TV or in the newspapers didn't hurt either. Okay, I'll accept your offer and go check in on maternity. Dad, I'll be back a little later. He never called me Dad to my face before. I was always the black sheep in the family. I never visited them or called. I was proud that he now accepted me. My mind drifted again, back in time. I guess when a person's time gets near, they live a lot in past memories. I remembered standing in the church with my 2 bodyguards when a detective pushed his way into our row. He completely ignored me and focused on my 2 bodyguards. Okay, you two, where's Petrov? He demanded in that typical cop tone. I interrupted him and said, they're with me. They're escorting me to my daughter's wedding. She's marrying one of you guys, and I hope he has a lot better manners. The detective zeroed in on me. And just who are you? I'm the real father of the bride, not the a-hole who is walking her down the aisle. My daughter was kidnapped from me by my ex-wife, and I came to see her get married. Now, are you going to make waves? Who invited you? He demanded. Okay, I guess you can't take a hint, I said, pulling out my cell phone. I'm calling the state attorney general's office and filing a complaint against you for harassment. That will stop the wedding and effectively end your career, a-hole. Listen, maybe we can discuss this, he began backpedaling. Listen, I'm sorry. The groom is in my division, and I thought these 2 were here to break up his wedding. So who's the guy in the wheelchair? He asked. He's her stepfather, a real jerk. But she didn't choose him, her mother did. She thought she was upgrading when she left me. Well, I've met the guy, and believe me, he's a real loser. I felt sorry for him being mugged until I met him. Real piece of work, the cop replied. Well, believe me when I say I don't want anything to spoil my little girl's wedding. Now either sit with us or go away, I demanded. I'm here with my wife, okay. Go. And remember, cops don't scare me, I growled as he walked back to his pew. I felt the bodyguard behind me pat my back and whisper, you've got real guts, my friend. The crowd in the church started to shift around as the music changed. I saw a woman in her early 50s being escorted down the aisle by one of the young ushers, followed by a man of about the same age. I suspected these were the parents of the groom. The woman looked as proud as could be. Next came my ex-wife. She was no longer the pretty young thing I once loved, the years had not been kind to her. So much for her upgrade to a better man. Her smile was set, and her eyes were hard. It was as if she was sizing up everyone in the church, measuring them against some unspoken standard. I looked at her and thought, what a phony. Then, lying in that hospital bed, I had a flashback to how it all began so many years ago. I had just graduated from college and was beginning my career in industry, or so I pretended. In reality, it was just a persona I invented to use when picking up women. I actually grew up in a working-class neighborhood, rough and gritty. I was expelled from school in my junior year for selling narcotics to my classmates. I was arrested and put in juvenile detention for 2 years. It was in that center that I met my current friends and chose my path, not into becoming a model citizen, but a soulless enforcer. My first victim was another inmate. He assaulted me in the shower one day, and 3 weeks later, I cracked his skull open with a hammer I'd stolen from the workshop. That was the beginning of my career in crime. I met my ex-wife, Diana, in a club. She was a dark-haired, blue-eyed beauty with a body to die for. I gave her my college grad and factory executive persona. Hell, I was in my early 20s and looked good enough to pull it off. My career in crime required that I keep myself in shape, fit, and alert. We hit it off, and about a year later, we were married. Sophia was born a year after that, and for a time, we were the perfect couple, or so it seemed. I pretended to go to work each day, telling her I was a manager overseeing multiple shifts at 3 different plants. I even set up a phony phone number she could call if she needed me in an emergency. If you overlook the fact that I was lying my face off about my job, I thought we had a great relationship. When Sophia turned 12, Diana went out and joined the workforce. She got a job at a large insurance company, and I never suspected anything until one night I came home, and they were gone. That was the last time I saw them until the wedding. I remembered my eyes meeting Diana's, and she stumbled as she walked down the aisle. I could see the recognition in her eyes when she realized who I was. I smiled my cruelest smile. There I stood, in my early 50s, looking fit and very wealthy, with impeccable clothes and grooming. I looked every bit the successful businessman, but she knew the truth. Diana recovered her poise and continued down the aisle. People around the church were trying to figure out what was going on. I put on my nicest smile, looking perfectly innocent, and enjoyed the feeling of having shaken up her carefully crafted life. I was still smiling as the bridal party started their walk down the center aisle. First came 2 adorable flower girls, about 3 or 4 years old, just as cute as could be. They were followed by a ring bearer in his little tux. You could hear all the parents and grandparents shuffling around to get a better look. Then the music shifted to the wedding march, and all eyes turned to the back of the church. Sophia entered, dressed in white, looking perfect. Okay, maybe I was a little biased, but remember, it had been 11 long years since I last saw her. Back then, she was just a gawky 12-year-old, barely beginning to grow into herself. Today, I was seeing the finished masterpiece, and I was a proud father. Next to her was a motorized wheelchair with a man I assumed to be her stepfather, with a stupid expression on his face as if he thought this whole parade was for him. He maneuvered the wheelchair up the aisle, forcing my daughter to yield to him. Someone on his side of the aisle stepped out and whispered something to him. His chair stopped, allowing Sophia to move ahead. She didn't wait for him to catch up. The stepfather pulled his chair up to the foot of the stairs leading to the altar, while the bridesmaids and groomsmen took their positions. The photographer was snapping away, trying to stay out of sight. The minister started the service, and when he asked, "Who here gives this bride in holy matrimony?" I jumped to my feet and yelled, "I, her real father, do." The noise level in the church increased drastically. My daughter turned and faced the assembly. "Daddy, is it really you?" "Yes, honey, it's me. There's nothing your mother or her husband could do to prevent me from being here on my little girl's big day." The mic the minister wore picked up her voice. "It's really him, Daniel. I'm so glad he could come." That simple statement echoed through the church. My eyes filled with tears. One of the bodyguards handed me a handkerchief and whispered, "Softy." Then he laughed and put his arm across my shoulders, hugging me. "You're a lucky man to have a daughter like that," he said. The minister calmed the congregation by continuing the ceremony. Before I knew it, they were married and walking down the aisle. I also started to stand up, only to realize that I hadn't actually sat down after my outburst. My daughter and her new husband stopped briefly beside my pew. "Daddy, this is Daniel. You two can get acquainted at the reception." "Save me a dance," she said with a smile, before they continued down to the front doors and into the sunny September afternoon. It looked like I was invited to the reception after all. The bridal party had the traditional white limos waiting outside, and at the end of the line was a black Rolls-Royce. My bodyguards escorted me to it. It's not proper etiquette to upstage the bride, I thought, just as the rear door opened and out stepped Natalie. She was all smiles as she hurried over to me and planted a warm, lingering kiss on my lips. When she finally pulled back, she said, "My flight was late, but I wanted to see our daughter get married." "Our daughter?" I asked, surprised. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Our daughter. What else should I call the child of the man I plan to marry? Now, shut up and get in the car. We're upstaging the bride." I climbed into the car, half on autopilot. As soon as we were settled, the driver pulled out, whisking us away to a grand reception hall they had rented for the event. We arrived ahead of the bridal party, giving Natalie and me time to get reacquainted as we waited for the guests to arrive. Within 10 minutes, it felt as if those 8 years apart had never happened. When the bridal party arrived, they set up a receiving line, and Natalie handed me an envelope representing a gift for the bride and groom. "I took the liberty of signing it from both of us," she said as I dropped it in the gift box. "I know it's impolite to ask, but if my daughter inquires, how much?" $100,000. "Is that too little?" she replied with a playful grin. "Natalie, you shouldn't have. I'll pay you back." She smiled. "Victor, your ex and her husband contributed nothing toward this event. Everything here was either paid for by the bride and groom or by Daniel's parents. Will you be picking up any of the reception costs?" "Absolutely," I said, caught off guard. I had no idea. "Of course, I'll reimburse them as soon as I get to my checkbook." "Already done," she said, patting her purse. "I have a check made out for Daniel's parents. You can give it to them at dinner." We reached the bridal party and were introduced to everyone, except my ex and her husband. They stepped out of the reception line as we approached. I introduced Natalie as my fiancée to everyone we met. My daughter teased, "Gee, Dad, we'd never have guessed Natalie was your fiancée, with the way you haven't let go of her hand. By the way," she continued, "Sophia, how do you put up with his constant pawing?" "Sophia," Natalie replied, laughing, "I love it. Your father is one of the kindest men I've ever met. I think I fell for him the first time I met him. If you're even a quarter as in love with Daniel as I am with your father, you're one lucky lady." "So, Dad," Sophia asked, "do you live close enough for Daniel and me to visit?" Natalie answered for me, "We're still deciding where we want to live. Your dad is on the East Coast, and I'm in Eastern Europe. I want to wake up in his arms every morning, not just some mornings. Maybe, now that you're married and living out here, we have another possible place to put down roots." Daniel chimed in, "Sophia and I would love for you both to be nearby. We plan on having a big family, so we'll need babysitters. All you need to do is call, and we'll be here," Natalie joked. "Of course, you might never get the kids back until they're adults." I finally felt that Natalie and I were holding up the line too long, so we moved into the dining room to find our seats. The tables were arranged with seating cards, but since Natalie and I weren't originally invited, there were no designated places for us. While we were milling around the back of the room, a woman who turned out to be the hostess approached us. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, please follow me. We're making some changes to the head table to accommodate both of you. The two gentlemen with you explained their security and will not be dining, correct? They take their jobs very seriously, but I'd still like them to join us. Can you find a way to accommodate them?" I asked. When we were seated at the head table, right next to the bride, I couldn't help but notice the expression on my ex-wife's face. She looked mortified, almost as if she'd been publicly shamed. To add insult to injury, she and her husband were relegated to seats farther back, as if they'd been added as an afterthought. It was perfect. The hostess noticed Natalie and me quietly enjoying the setup and whispered, "Daniel's father requested these seats for you," and the bride agreed. Since he's covering the reception costs, we quickly agreed. Natalie gave my arm a squeeze at the mention of covering the reception costs. I interrupted, "Actually, I'll be covering it. Can you please put the reception charges on my account? The hostess looked surprised but nodded. Yes, sir. But we'll need a little time to upgrade to a sit-down dinner for everyone. I can start appetizers and a full bar in about 10 minutes as a buffer. Thank you, Natalie said warmly. We appreciate your effort. Later, I showed my gratitude by slipping her a stack of $100 bills, one for each member of the waitstaff, plus a generous amount for the kitchen. Daniel's mother was also quick to notice the unplanned extras. She immediately started searching for the hostess, looking worried. Before I could reach her, Natalie was already by her side, whispering assurances in her ear. When she returned to me, Natalie said she was concerned about the costs. I told her we were happy to cover it, and she invited us to dinner next week to get better acquainted. The reception went on beautifully. The buffet lines were replaced by waitstaff who served everyone at their seats. The bar was open, with no one needing to pay for drinks. And while we didn't have a concert orchestra, the DJ was fantastic, setting the perfect mood. The bestman gave a funny toast. He was another detective working with Daniel. As I listened to his tribute, my face must have reflected the revulsion at the thought of another cop in the family. Stop it, Natalie whispered. You'll need to get used to police in our family. I almost said something back, but her words sank in our family. I glanced at her, surprised, but she just smiled back. That's right, she continued. I'm not letting you get away again. After the best man's speech, someone handed me the mic. I hadn't prepared anything, as I hadn't expected to be there. Hi, everyone. I'm Victor Bennett, the bride's real father. Today marks the second most important day of my life. The first was when she was born. I'd tell you how long ago that was, but then she'd make me kill everyone here. The crowd chuckled. When Sophia was 12, her mother took her away, changing both their names to distance her from me. For years, Sophia was told I didn't want to see her, and eventually, she was told I had passed away. But I never stopped searching for her. Now that I've found her, I realize that she comes with her own husband, her very own cop. And, lucky for me, I have a surefire way to get my tickets fixed, I joked, prompting laughter from Daniel's colleagues. With a more serious tone, I said, I have one piece of advice for the newlyweds: always talk to each other. Discuss everything. Marriage is a partnership, and it will be rocky at times. Don't go to bed angry, talk things out right then and there. There are no winners or losers, just two people in love, finding common ground. I paused, glancing at Diana. My ex-wife left me before I even knew there was a problem. I guess she thought I wasn't good enough and wanted to trade up. And here we are today, she's with a man who has no money and no desire to work. I overheard her complaining about how much this wedding cost, but let's set the record straight, Daniel's parents covered the expenses, not her. And Natalie and I have already arranged to cover everything tonight. At this point, the hall went quiet. Diana was glaring at me, her face hardening. I squeezed Natalie's hand, smiling. So, Diana, thank you for leaving me. Today, I realize I was the one who upgraded. I'm now a very wealthy man with a wonderful fiancé, and you, well, you look as if life hasn't been kind. On this day, the happiest day of our daughter's life, you look worn and beaten by the years. Then, to my surprise, Diana's composure shattered. She screamed, "USC. Sucker," and charged at me with the knife they had used to cut the wedding cake. My bodyguard did his job, intercepting her with a swift, hard blow. I remember thinking, ouch, that's got to hurt. The police were called, and she was placed in custody, charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Her husband, Arthur, was left shouting empty threats and hurling insults at the police until my second bodyguard leaned in close and whispered something to him. Whatever it was, Arthur turned pale, fell silent, and quickly left in his van. The minister calmed the congregation by continuing the ceremony. Before I knew it, they were married and walking down the aisle. I also started to stand up, only to realize that I hadn't actually sat down after my outburst. My daughter and her new husband stopped briefly beside my pew. "Daddy, this is Daniel. You two can get acquainted at the reception." "Save me a dance," she said with a smile, before they continued down to the front doors and into the sunny September afternoon. It looked like I was invited to the reception after all. The bridal party had the traditional white limos waiting outside, and at the end of the line was a black Rolls-Royce. My bodyguards escorted me to it. It's not proper etiquette to upstage the bride, I thought, just as the rear door opened and out stepped Natalie. She was all smiles as she hurried over to me and planted a warm, lingering kiss on my lips. When she finally pulled back, she said, "My flight was late, but I wanted to see our daughter get married." "Our daughter?" I asked, surprised. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Our daughter. What else should I call the child of the man I plan to marry? Now, shut up and get in the car. We're upstaging the bride." I climbed into the car, half on autopilot. As soon as we were settled, the driver pulled out, whisking us away to a grand reception hall they had rented for the event. We arrived ahead of the bridal party, giving Natalie and me time to get reacquainted as we waited for the guests to arrive. Within 10 minutes, it felt as if those 8 years apart had never happened. When the bridal party arrived, they set up a receiving line, and Natalie handed me an envelope representing a gift for the bride and groom. "I took the liberty of signing it from both of us," she said as I dropped it in the gift box. "I know it's impolite to ask, but if my daughter inquires, how much?" $100,000. "Is that too little?" she replied with a playful grin. "Natalie, you shouldn't have. I'll pay you back." She smiled. "Victor, your ex and her husband contributed nothing toward this event. Everything here was either paid for by the bride and groom or by Daniel's parents. Will you be picking up any of the reception costs?" "Absolutely," I said, caught off guard. I had no idea. "Of course, I'll reimburse them as soon as I get to my checkbook." "Already done," she said, patting her purse. "I have a check made out for Daniel's parents. You can give it to them at dinner." We reached the bridal party and were introduced to everyone, except my ex and her husband. They stepped out of the reception line as we approached. I introduced Natalie as my fiancée to everyone we met. My daughter teased, "Gee, Dad, we'd never have guessed Natalie was your fiancée, with the way you haven't let go of her hand. By the way," she continued, "Sophia, how do you put up with his constant pawing?" "Sophia," Natalie replied, laughing, "I love it. Your father is one of the kindest men I've ever met. I think I fell for him the first time I met him. If you're even a quarter as in love with Daniel as I am with your father, you're one lucky lady." "So, Dad," Sophia asked, "do you live close enough for Daniel and me to visit?" Natalie answered for me, "We're still deciding where we want to live. Your dad is on the East Coast, and I'm in Eastern Europe. I want to wake up in his arms every morning, not just some mornings. Maybe, now that you're married and living out here, we have another possible place to put down roots." Daniel chimed in, "Sophia and I would love for you both to be nearby. We plan on having a big family, so we'll need babysitters. All you need to do is call, and we'll be here," Natalie joked. "Of course, you might never get the kids back until they're adults." I finally felt that Natalie and I were holding up the line too long, so we moved into the dining room to find our seats. The tables were arranged with seating cards, but since Natalie and I weren't originally invited, there were no designated places for us. While we were milling around the back of the room, a woman who turned out to be the hostess approached us. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, please follow me. We're making some changes to the head table to accommodate both of you. The two gentlemen with you explained their security and will not be dining, correct? They take their jobs very seriously, but I'd still like them to join us. Can you find a way to accommodate them?" I asked. When we were seated at the head table, right next to the bride, I couldn't help but notice the expression on my ex-wife's face. She looked mortified, almost as if she'd been publicly shamed. To add insult to injury, she and her husband were relegated to seats farther back, as if they'd been added as an afterthought. It was perfect. The hostess noticed Natalie and me quietly enjoying the setup and whispered, "Daniel's father requested these seats for you," and the bride agreed. Since he's covering the reception costs, we quickly agreed. Natalie gave my arm a squeeze at the mention of covering the reception costs. I interrupted, "Actually, I'll be covering it. Can you please put the reception charges on my account?" The hostess looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, sir. But we'll need a little time to upgrade to a sit-down dinner for everyone. I can start appetizers and a full bar in about 10 minutes as a buffer." "Thank you," Natalie said warmly. "We appreciate your effort." Later, I showed my gratitude by slipping her a stack of $100 bills, one for each member of the wait staff, plus a generous amount for the kitchen. Daniel's mother was also quick to notice the unplanned extras. She immediately started searching for the hostess, looking worried. Before I could reach her, Natalie was already by her side, whispering assurances in her ear. When she returned to me, Natalie said she was concerned about the costs. I told her we were happy to cover it, and she invited us to dinner next week to get better acquainted. The reception went on beautifully. The buffet lines were replaced by wait staff who served everyone at their seats. The bar was open, with no one needing to pay for drinks. And while we didn't have a concert orchestra, the DJ was fantastic, setting the perfect mood. The bestman gave a funny toast. He was another detective working with Daniel. As I listened to his tribute, my face must have reflected the revulsion at the thought of another cop in the family. "Stop it," Natalie whispered. "You'll need to get used to police in our family." I almost said something back, but her words sank in our family. I glanced at her, surprised, but she just smiled back. "That's right," she continued. "I'm not letting you get away again." After the best man's speech, someone handed me the mic. I hadn't prepared anything, as I hadn't expected to be there. "Hi, everyone. I'm Victor Bennett, the bride's real father. Today marks the second most important day of my life. The first was when she was born. I'd tell you how long ago that was, but then she'd make me kill everyone here." The crowd chuckled. When Sophia was 12, her mother took her away, changing both their names to distance her from me. For years, Sophia was told I didn't want to see her, and eventually, she was told I had passed away. But I never stopped searching for her. Now that I've found her, I realize that she comes with her own husband, her very own cop. And, lucky for me, I have a surefire way to get my tickets fixed, I joked, prompting laughter from Daniel's colleagues. With a more serious tone, I said, I have one piece of advice for the newlyweds: always talk to each other. Discuss everything. Marriage is a partnership, and it will be rocky at times. Don't go to bed angry, talk things out right then and there. There are no winners or losers, just two people in love, finding common ground. I paused, glancing at Diana. My ex-wife left me before I even knew there was a problem. I guess she thought I wasn't good enough and wanted to trade up. And here we are today, she's with a man who has no money and no desire to work. I overheard her complaining about how much this wedding cost, but let's set the record straight: Daniel's parents covered the expenses, not her. And Natalie and I have already arranged to cover everything tonight. At this point, the hall went quiet. Diana was glaring at me, her face hardening. I squeezed Natalie's hand, smiling. "So, Diana, thank you for leaving me. Today, I realize I was the one who upgraded. I'm now a very wealthy man with a wonderful fiancé, and you, well, you look as if life hasn't been kind. On this day, the happiest day of our daughter's life, you look worn and beaten by the years." Then, to my surprise, Diana's composure shattered. She screamed, "USC. Sucker," and charged at me with the knife they had used to cut the wedding cake. My bodyguard did his job, intercepting her with a swift, hard blow. I remember thinking, ouch, that's got to hurt. The police were called, and she was placed in custody, charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Her husband, Arthur, was left shouting empty threats and hurling insults at the police until my second bodyguard leaned in close and whispered something to him. Whatever it was, Arthur turned pale, fell silent, and quickly left in his van. Sophia was understandably upset, but Daniel and her friends quickly calmed her down. The upcoming dances seemed to help take her mind off the chaos, and soon, she was smiling again. At one point, as I was dancing with Natalie, Daniel cut in. Suddenly, I found myself holding my little girl, swaying to Daddy's little girl in the middle of the dance floor, just the two of us. I felt a lump in my throat, and my eyes began to water. My baby was all grown up. Natalie noticed my reaction as she watched from the sidelines, and when we switched partners again, she gave me a knowing smile. "Okay, tough guy, why the red eyes?" she teased. "Allergies," I muttered, trying to maintain my composure. "Liar," she whispered, pulling me closer. That year turned out to be one of the best. Igor Mikhailov retired from the business, as the organized crime task force was getting too close for his comfort. He and his wife moved to Italy, near the French Riviera. Natalie and I ended up buying his house in the Beverly Hills, and we gave it to Sophia and Daniel so they'd have a place to raise their family. They promised to take good care of it so that Natalie and I would always have a place to stay whenever we traveled north. And, yes, I said north. Natalie and I bought a villa on the coast in the south of Portugal. I handed over most of my business interests to Leo, my second-in-command, keeping only a few legitimate operations that generated a nice income without needing my hands-on attention. Natalie's brothers took over her father's empire. Though she still advised them, her role quickly diminished as her brothers learned to manage things on their own. Natalie's father continued his decline into dementia, each visit with him becoming harder for her. Each time we saw him, she would cry for days afterward. Watching him slowly lose himself was incredibly painful for her. I did my best to comfort her, holding her close as she cried herself to sleep. Awareness came back to me in the hospital. I was still completely paralyzed. But this time, I was able to piece together a timeline. I'd been out for nearly a week. I sensed a few people entering my room and recognized my nurse's voice. She was explaining my care routine to someone, reminding them to talk to me as if I were awake. I heard my daughter's voice. "Granddad, I'd like to introduce you to your great-grandson, Thomas Victor Turner," she said, leaning close to my ear. "The Victor is for you," she whispered. "We named him after you." The last thing I remembered was hearing, "Mom, hand me some tissues." His eyes are watering. The next time I regained consciousness, I thought of my ex-wife, Diana. After her arrest for assaulting me at the wedding, she was deemed unfit to stand trial and committed to a psychiatric institution for treatment. I admit, I wanted to have her taken care of for attempting to kill me. The bulldog needed to send a message, after all, but Natalie wouldn't let me harm her. "She's still your daughter's mother, Victor. If you hurt her, Sophia will be devastated." "Let it go," Natalie reasoned. She was right, of course, though I put up a good show of protest. In the end, I respected her wishes. There were no such protections for Arthur, however. He died in an accident when his motorized wheelchair malfunctioned, sending him off a fourth-floor balcony. Oddly, after learning of his death, Diana's condition began to improve. Within 2 months, she was deemed fit for release, and Sophia and Daniel set her up in an in-law apartment on their property. They told me that she was adjusting well, though she continued to avoid me whenever I visited. Sophia explained that her mother felt too guilty for everything she'd done to face me. Natalie, on the other hand, became Diana's regular visitor and friend. Every time we visited Sophia and Daniel, Natalie would stop by Diana's apartment with a small gift or treat. Diana's mental state wasn't stable enough for her to hold down a real job, so Sophia and Daniel provided for her. They gave her everything she needed, including a small 2-monthly allowance. One night, as Natalie and I lay in bed, she began explaining Diana's financial situation. I knew where the conversation was going, but I played along, pretending to be oblivious. Natalie used her charm to persuade me, and I swear it was some of the best sex I'd ever had. By the next morning, I'd set up an automatic 2-monthly transfer of $3,000 into Diana's account, which I could well afford. A few 2 months later, someone let it slip to Diana that I was behind the payments. One day, as I was visiting the kids, Diana approached me. "Victor, thank you for everything." I cut her off, saying, "Diana, you're my daughter's mother. If you suffer, my daughter suffers, and I don't want that. I may never like what you did to me, but I can let it go to keep the peace." She nodded, accepting my words before leaving the room. Later that night, Natalie, who had overheard the exchange, called me an a-hole, specifically, her a-hole, and added that she was still working on that small flaw of mine. Almost 2 years later, Natalie and I welcomed our first grandchild, Benjamin James Smith. Those allergies of mine acted up again when I first saw him in the hospital. "My tough guy with a marshmallow center," Natalie whispered to me as we looked at him together. My eyes were taped shut in the hospital again, but the bed had been raised, and my head was turned toward the right side, where I saw my daughter sitting and crying quietly. "It's time to let go now, Daddy. Natalie is waiting for you." Thanks for tuning in. What do you think about Victor's incredible journey and the choices he made along the way? Did he finally find peace in the end? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more captivating stories. See you in the next video.